Plug your ears, folks. Sorry about the noise. I'm still trying to work on getting a better intro. This one's shorter, quicker for my Battletech series. And just in case you're curious, I'm going to show it once. That's where it came from. All right. Uh, I tried getting stuff off the internet. It seems like every other thing I download either isn't compatible, doesn't work, or the YouTube tags it as a copyright infringement. Everything else never comes back as a copyright. None of the stuff comes back as copyright issue, but somehow or another, the music clips do because it's some wonderful program. Anyway, this is the original 1985's Battletech a Game of Armor Compact. This would have been, and it still is, the tabletop war game version of a lot of the video games that so many people really enjoy today. I have only played one Battletech video game, and that was many, many years ago. And in part because I simply don't have an elaborate enough computer to run those programs well. And second, because it just video games. I like them. Don't get me wrong. I play a few, but they're not really my thing. They never have been my thing. The original box set, and I don't have the box anymore, came with a number of cardboard cutouts. You can get an updated version. They still create these modern versions of them, and the box set's pretty much the same as what it was back then. You got the handbook here that came, the rule book that came with it. You got a handful of back then they were cardboard cutouts of mechs and little plastic bases for them to set on, and there was a couple pull-out card stock items, as well as four fairly robust cardboard maps, which I still have one or two of them floating around here, and I will be introducing them as backstop material at some point here in the near future. Later down the road, of course, the newer versions come out with a plastic. As far as I know, they're plastic versions of these. These here are some of the lead miniatures that I purchased over the decades back in the day. Obviously, they do not sell them anymore. This is Raoul Partha, 1997. This particular dragon that I got, which year is 1997. 87 for this one. 86. This might be 87. I can't really see even with my glasses. I need to get a magnifying glass to see the dates on those. 88. So all these were bought in the late 80s. At some point, they switched out. They got away from lead because lead's toxic, and they used pewter and plastic, of course, which I have mixed opinions on plastic and stuff like that. The other downside to the lead is they're kind of fragile, so it doesn't take much damage to actually knock something off of one of these things, which is why we take care of them as much as we can. And I used to have several battalions. I had a couple hundred of these bad boys, and some of these things could cost anywhere from $3 to $7 for a bubble pack, and that was in 80s money, of course, 90s money. So things have gotten much different since then. So just for my own sense of well-being, I will move these little bad boys up here out of the way so my clumsy hands and stuff won't knock them down. I'm going to be breaking down some of this stuff in several methods. I want to do an overview in my traditional style, and then I'm going to actually try to step it up a hair because I want to lead you through the introduction of Battletech and why it's such a rich, deep genre, and why it grew into a much bigger beast over time. One of the things I also like to point out for those who are into the understanding of clunky, chunky rule sets and less chunky, these are pretty simplistic. It's pretty straightforward. It's not overly complicated. There's not a huge amount of additional set-in rules. That there are some expansion rules that make things more detailed. And as time goes on, they do expand on those rules. So they add extra caveats and things like that. But the straightforward idea here is you keep track. It's a resource management game and a strategy tactical game at the beginning. And later it becomes a role-playing game and or a melding of all that together. It's a matter of your personal preference and how you choose to play out your scenarios and your campaigns. So it has a little bit for everybody, right? So when we talk about the standard setup and the mech sheet, so your mech design sheet is going to show where everything's located in your machine for a critical hit location. This is the armor diagram, which only so many of these circles would be available. If your mech only has 7 armor points in each arm, then you would count out 7 open ones, and then you would take a marker and fill in the rest of these things so that they're no longer available to you. You only have the 7 or so on each arm available for tracking damage. Same thing goes for the head, the torso, center-torso, and legs, right? And then we keep track of what our weapons are and their location. We want to know the mech's type, its size, its class, its movement points, its running points, and its jump points if it has the ability to jump. And if it has weapons that require ammo, we track those and how much weapons we use. Another thing that was made this system different from any system prior to its existence that I'm aware of was that we actually have to track heat. Each mech generates an X amount of generic heat during operations because they're powered by a fusion reactor. And in some cases, some really Frankenstein mechs and or commercial industrial mechs use internal combustion engines to operate, much less efficiently, of course, as a fusion, but they do have them. And you would have to keep track of your heat during battle. Firing every weapon you fire has some heat output. Obviously, energy weapons produce a lot more heat requirement energy-wise on the engine than a ballistic weapon would. So this is important because you reach a certain critical level of heat. This is where the heat scale comes in. We have shutdown, ammo explosions, massive negatives to movement and fire ability. More ammo. So the higher the heat, the more extreme the options have. So if we're burning at 5 points of heat beyond our base, then we have a -1 to a movement. 8 points is -1 to movement and -1 to fire. If we're using 10 heat points, we're now at -2 movement, etc. So it's pretty straightforward keeping track of things. We're back to resource management. And to reduce your heat, you slow down, you fire your weapons less, or you measure what weapons you fire. If your plasma weapon produces 3 points of heat and a machine gun produces 0 heat, hello. And of course, the plasma weapon is going to do a massive amount more damage than the machine gun also. So hello. So in that concept, we got our facing and movement. Basic movement's pretty straightforward. You have a hex system, and that's 6 facing. So your mech's going to go forward, backwards, to the left, to the right, backward left, backward right. And to turn facing, your mech movement is each hex is a move, or each movement change is a move. So if I want to turn to the right, I'm going to go one move to the right, and then I can do what I need to do and go forward. So we got our movement points and the cost, walking, running, and then the terrain modifiers that apply based on what's on the map. Obviously, trying to move across an open plain is much easier, much less problematic than moving through a thick forest or through rocky terrain. The upside to the downside of that is walking through clear terrain means you're a walking target for anything on the field and easier to hit. So if you have heavy trees between you and something else, they're going to have problems. You're going to have problems shooting through the trees. They're going to have problems shooting at you, etc., etc. So it goes hand in hand. Battle mechs and heat. So the whole section on dealing with build up of heat, getting rid of heat, using water hexes to help quickly reduce heat. So we got combat situations, facing, range of weaponry, firing your weapons, hit locations, things like this. Our game setup, the basic system, and then a little bit more advanced system playing the game, using initiative, sequence of play, movement again, weapon combat, firing arcs, dealing with line of sight and all kinds of obstructions, firing the weapons themselves, how to factor that range factor out, I will find my measuring device. One of the if you've seen anybody play a tabletop war game, you've probably seen various. Some people use strings, some people use rulers. I I was I've been a fan of I purposely designed my own ruler, and I used based off of I made marks on it. They were clearly defined short, medium, and long range. And so all I had to do is put my ruler down or just hover it slightly above the units to measure the distance. So if I knew what I was in range or not, go on and go forth. Our basic stats, armor stats, another blueprint. The This would be a quick sheet, a cheat sheet in some aspect. There was a cardboard cutout version of this too, and it came in the box, at least the one that I had. What I went off to do is we ran off copies of this and put them in a sleeve, plastic sleeve, so we could use them over and over. It just makes for quick reference, so you don't need to keep flipping back and forth to the book. It's one of the reasons the book is so well intact. There's a lot of fastest books that don't age well. They don't hold up to lots and lots of consistent use. So the fact that you can do this stuff makes it so much easier and nicer on your books because you're not tearing them up as much. Another thing that we also did was we got copies and made copies of these. We didn't use the actual sheets that we had. So I still have all my sheets. But what I would do is I would make a copy of this, and I would either, depending on my finances at the time, if I had I had the ability to make numerous copies, and back in the day, it could cost you as much as a quarter per copy at a Xerox at a local grocery store if you didn't have your own printer and to print them out yourself. So being money conscious, I would take, once again, plastic sleeves and stick these into sleeves, and I would use an erasable marker to fill in whatever I needed to mark off or change, and it worked quite well. I've also used writable tape. I put layers of tape across these things and used a pencil, a mechanical pencil, because it's a light thread, it's a light lead, and a mechanical eraser to track everything and reuse my surface over and over and over again. That's just my personal preference, and so on and so forth. This is a working example of a chameleon mech, which is considered a training mech. It's not an actual combat mech, and would be, well, they say over and over in the book, these would not be suitable for actual combat. The damn thing's a 50-ton machine with enough armor and weapons to handle a light mech. So I'm of the opinion that this would actually be a functional machine in many situations, but that's just my opinion. So here's a blank worksheet to work from. And then we got some slightly more advanced rules, things like dealing with your going hit locations, determining damage, critical hits, what happens if you end up prone mechs, and weapon fire. Certain machines have certain weapons in certain locations, which means if your mech's knocked down, you're still not necessarily out of the fight. Whereas you might be in a different machine depending on how everything's placed. Certain machines are easier to get back up off the ground than others as well, because they have arms and hands, and some don't, which has always been kind of a conundrum. And we're not going to have that discussion today in this particular video about the merits of why tanks and armored vehicles is still far superior to these things called battle mechs. And I'm sorry, but I'm a proponent of the mech themselves, and if we could actually build something like this, I'm telling you, they would be far more. And we will have, I plan to do a video on my arguments, the pros and cons of the machine and why it is superior to any kind of tracked or ground effect vehicle, period. And keep in mind too that if you're not used to Battletech or MechWarrior, these machines work and move much more like those if you've seen in Pacific Rim, those big mechanized war machine or combat machines that they use in that series of movies, than in the stuff we see in, say, Star Wars. The AT-AT, for example, very ponderous, very slow. Now, there are certain types of battle mechs that would actually function similar to that kind of machine, whereas the ATSTs are much more limber and maneuverable and more flexible, and tend to be more in tune with a mech, as opposed to the Gundams. There are Gundams that basically are battle mechs, and Gundams are very similar, if not identical. The difference being is the genre, setting, and of course the copyright issues and laws. So, like I said, I think I said that in my intro video too, that the original base system that came out was Battle Droids, and Lucasfilm shut them down because droid is the word droid used commercially is copyrighted by Lucasfilm, so they could not use them. And BattleBots probably sounded a bit lame, so they chose, you know, um, what they did, Battletech, Battle Mechs. This, like I said, also got them a little bit into the issue with the Robotech franchise, and Facet and Robotech had a long, drawn-out brawl, mostly over some of the design concepts, because it is suggested that certain types of mechs, especially the lighter mechs that were in use, with some of the more popular designs, the Phoenix Hawk, for example, the Wasp, the Locust, all these things come from other sources other than their own original stuff, which, so here's an example of a Phoenix Hawk, and this is quite similar to some Robotech machines that they did have some copyright issues with, and or an understanding with them that didn't always pan out the way it was supposed to. So we will do some various things on this stuff. One of these, I will do a video on how to set up a mech, how to set up a sheet, how to, I don't really, I can do probably a brief video on how actually, run a couple rounds on a board, on a map. One of the things I know is that it was a space. You really needed a lot of space. You needed a decent sized table to work from. The smallest table that I have here would be very suitable maybe for limited combat, very narrow stuff, or just an arena combat style, or a couple individual mechs. But if I'm talking a large scale of stuff, I either need to graduate up to the Mech Force set of rules, which is a whole other set of videos, and eventually I will get to them, and or have much more table space. I played at places with people where we had numerous 8x8, 4x8 tables set together, or sheets of plywood set together. Myself did that. I knew a friend who had a pool table that he had sheets of wood he put over top the pool table, and in another place I knew a guy with a pool table. We just used the pool table. So that's kind of how this stuff played out. And I went to a couple conventions back in the day and was involved in a few things, but that's a long time ago. Anyway, so there is our beginning to Battletech, a game of armored combat.